Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production as part of the Wondery Podcast Network. NASCAR heads to its first road course of the season, Circuit of the Americas in lovely Austin, Texas. And to break it all down, we will dive deep into the numbers, a fantastic interview with former driver and current pit road reporter Regan Smith. But before we get there, I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and racing analyst, the one, the only Chris Wormy. And Wormser, did you enjoy yet another bye week on the NASCAR schedule with Super Speedway Racing from Atlanta?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was really happy to cash a LaJoy ticket, but other than that, not much going on from the betting side of things.
All right. Well, I guess I should say the bye week comes relatively speaking because we did all the heavy lifting early in the week. You mentioned Corey LaJoy. We gave that out here on the Stay Green podcast. But once that's already done, there's no practice to watch. There's not a whole heck of a live betting. So it may as well be a Bloody Mary for you first thing in the morning in Old Town. Kick your feet up and turn it on to watch the last 10 laps. Apparently the only thing that matters, unless we're talking about the Xfinity race that had 96 cautions in the first stage.
Well, I have a confession I need to make, and we haven't talked about this. Old Worm had to pull the trigger. He just can't help himself.
he had to do it. Oh, this will be good.
I can't do it. I just can't. I literally, Todd, if it was on, I was playing darts with Jenna, and specifically told, like, I don't need to watch it. And then I'm, kind of checking on my phone, and the next thing you know, I got the bartender changing the channel. I know no one wants to watch NASCAR, but I'm going to be that guy. And, then I start watching, and I think with 15 to go, it looked like Logano had the best car. So just quickly pulled up Bovada of all places to find out that my max bet was only $100. So I picked up 400 crumbs.
Hey, that's a lot. That's a lot of beers and a lot of chicken wings when you're playing darts. I mean, the fact that book will take even $100 from you is pretty impressive. So I figured you couldn't resist the temptation in all capacities. But you're right. Joey Logano had the best hot rod. Ultimately deserved to win the race. Led 63 to start. Finished with 140 in total. But I was just good to see two veterans, former teammates, race each other cleanly in that final lap. Obviously, Brad wishes things would have gone differently. A little bit of consternation from me because I wasn't sure who finished second or third, but no doubt the 22 grabs the victory, and Joey Logano continues to cement his legacy. Not like there was much up for debate, but punches his ticket to the postseason. For those folks that are new to Stay Green, Stage 1, typically a brief recap of everything we're doing, and much like the road course we're going to deal with this weekend, it is extremely brief. Stage 2, all about trying to make you a better handicapper, or some weeks when they have the opportunity to talk to some influential personalities and guests, we will definitely take advantage like we did today with Regan Smith. In Stage 3, of course, a full race breakdown. Before we get to that Regan Smith interview, do want to encourage all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners, to follow Chris on Twitter. That's at ChrisWormy15. Kudos, by the way, for you getting over the century mark, or I guess the millennium mark at 1,000 followers. Job well done. No thanks to Rory and some of the members of the grassroots NASCAR community. You can follow me on Twitter at Todd Furman. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And without further ado, former driver of the 7 car, current pit road reporter, and a man who has won the Southern 500, something Chris and I will never accomplish. Thrilled to welcome in our next guest here on Stay Green, former Xfinity champion, former Cup winner. He's got a decorated resume when it comes to all things across the 3 series: trucks, Xfinity, Cup. Regan Smith, and you can see Regan as part of the Fox telecast, not only on Race Up throughout the course of the week, but obviously on Xfinity and Cup broadcast. Regan, thanks for jumping into the Stay Green mix. Hopefully you know what you're getting yourself in for here.
I'm a little bit nervous right now, but I feel like we can handle just about anything that might pop up here today, and excited to be on with you guys. Always look forward to talking to you guys.
I mean, the bottom line is no matter what questions we ask here, it won't be nearly as impactful or eye-opening as what you went through on Saturday. I know Chris had a question to hit you up with right off the top. So, Chris, the floor is yours.
Yeah, when Josh parked his car in that parking spot right there in the start-finish line, like, what's going through your mind? Like, obviously, you probably have producers in your ear like, hey, we need an interview. And obviously, you need an interview. But there's protocols that go along with this interview process. I'm kind of curious what was going through your mind. And then what are some of the other protocols that maybe the fans might not know? Like, I had no idea that you couldn't interview someone before the infield care center. So if you just kind of touch on that, I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I think to get the full body of work for that race, you got to go back to the start of it. Right. And that Xfinity race, for whatever reason, they could not get those cars going in a straight line. And I think there's a number of reasons for that we could sit and highlight. But when all is said and done, Josh Williams, unfortunately, one of the guys that gets caught up on one of the wrecks, and when it all, push comes to shove, they put Barabond, which is basically a sticky tape patch on the race car to try and fix it up. It's a high strength tape patch, but it was so cold that day that this stuff wouldn't stick. So they go back to green flag racing, it blows off his car, and he gets penalized for it ultimately. And the penalty was he had to park his car, and that's written into the rule book now. And it's probably not a rule, honestly. I've got to go back and read it myself to know exactly how it reads and to fully understand it. But it's the first time in my experience that's been utilized on a driver, and Josh wasn't happy about that. And and I don't know what was going on the radios, within his team, if he was, getting pumped up by somebody else, or how we got to the point where he decided to park his car on the front stretch. And we've all been there, right? Like, we're sitting in traffic going to a game or going to an event, and we're like, I'd rather just park right on the interstate. I can walk in quicker. Like, we've all wanted to do it at some point or another. The difference is he did it at a racetrack when there was cars actively racing on the track still. I saw him. I didn't know what had happened because we were calling pit stops and doing some other stuff and had a lot going on at that particular moment, because it was under yellow. And I saw a car park, and we've got a little camera that we carry with us that we can see what's going on the racetrack. And I looked at my little camera, and I thought, well, Josh just parked his car and he's walking across the racetrack. And then I hear I hear Adam Alexander, who's our lead announcer, in my ear, announcing what's going on. And I look up, and I'm like, well, hell, that's not that far away from me. I think I can get there pretty quick. So I hit up the producer on our talk back, and I said, hey, I'm going to go see if I can get him real quick. And as I was going down there, it triggered in my mind. I may have had my wrist slapped a few times for interviewing guys before they go to the care center. And typically, if your vehicle is involved in a incident, you got to go to the care center. And I got over to the pit stall where he was, which was his team's pit stall. And there was a lot of words, a lot of things being said, some friendly, some not so friendly. I went from hearing curse words to seeing people shaking hands. So I'm trying to gather what's going on at this moment in my head and figure it all out. And they turned my microphone on. They came to me, and I was like, "Oh, we're hot now." And in the meantime of that, all you can really do is just say, "Hey, don't believe we're going to be able to talk to him right now." And NASCAR wants to go to the care center, which is what they did. And as of the recording of this, whatever fine or whatever penalty he's going to get for parking his car on the racetrack has not come out yet. But with that being said, I'm sure it's going to be, a pretty good one. And we'll have to see if Josh is at the racetrack this weekend or not. And, we can talk to him more about it then, because we weren't able to get him after he went to the care center either, because then he went directly to the NASCAR hauler. And it may have been a weird way to save Josh a little bit more money, because I'm sure that he would not have been very happy in that interview at that time.
Right. Yeah. Well, and he has Denny paying the fine for him. I think Denny stepped up and said that he would take care of any fines that he had.
I need to get on Denny's good side. I got 3 kids. A lot of stuff over here.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Apparently, Denny's got a lot of cash burning holes in his pockets, given everything that's gone on in terms of helping with fines, his own and, of course, others around the track. But, Regan, you've been doing the pit reporting thing for how long now? Is it 2 years, 3 years?
No, I think I'm on my 6th year right now. So
has it been that long?
What's been a while. Yeah.
What's been the biggest change? Obviously, we know you're not behind the wheel of a car when you're doing all that, but making the change and transition from being a driver out there racing every weekend to a job that still can be just as difficult for a variety of different reasons, with the perspective you can provide different from someone who never spent time and countless races behind the wheel of a car in a Truck Series, Xfinity, or Cup.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest change is, I'm on pit road, right, and I'm a driver, and there's some stuff that happens on pit road that I don't always, that I don't always, I shouldn't say understand. I understand what it is, but it takes me a minute to gather what those guys are doing. And in particular, last year when we had the implementation of the new race car, the next gen car, or I don't call it next gen, I just call it the car that we race now. But when we had the implementation of that car, pit stops evolved rapidly. We went from 14-second stops to 8-second stops that we're doing. And I think over the 6 years, give or take, now that I've been doing it, that's been the most drastic change. The old car was normal to me. I understood the parts and pieces that they were working on. I understood how the pit stop was going to flow, how it was going to sequence out, and what was going to take place there. And anything that pertains to talking to a driver or interviewing a driver or understanding that aspect of the sport, I've got a really good grasp of that. But when they made the pit changes last year, it was a lot for all of us to keep up with. We had a magnitude of different problems, on pit stops, whether it was loose wheels, whether it was lug nuts coming off, whether it was, vibrations, just all kinds of stuff happening. And it was also new that we didn't always have the right answers at the right time. And, part of that was you didn't have the right answers until a week later when a team finally told you, because they didn't have the answers and they didn't even know at the time. So I think that's been the toughest part for me in terms of the transition out of the seat onto pit road. It was probably a good time for me in my career to do that. I kind of looked at, I'd done a couple races with Fox, and I was doing stuff in the studio for Fox. And, it was not appearing that in my Cup career, I was going to be able to get into really good equipment again. It just, the stars weren't really lining up. And I'm not the type to go out there. It's weird because you start your career off, or the way I started my career off was in bad equipment and work my way into good equipment over the years. And when you're in the bad equipment and you haven't been in the good equipment, you don't know the difference and you don't know what it's like. But when you've been in the good equipment and then you have to go back to the equipment, it sucks. And I just got to the point where I didn't want to ride around in the back. And if I couldn't win races, this popped up. And, obviously Fox's portion of the schedule is only half a year. We do still have the studio show that we do every week or every night, basically. But it was a good timing, and decided to try something different for a little while.
Well, I mean, you mentioned driving good equipment. We know 2011, no doubt a special year for you, with top 10 finishes and all 4 Crown Jewel races. But take us through when you win your first ever Cup victory at Darlington, what it meant winning the Southern 500. And let's be honest here. Do you think under the current car in the next gen, or we'll call it the new car, could somebody have won that race if they stayed out on old tires like you did to grab that checker flag?
Well, first off, what that meant was, it meant the world to me. And a couple of years prior to that, I guess it was 3 years prior to that, I had thought I had won my first race at Talladega, driving for DEI. And unfortunately, the yellow line rule that we all hear so much about now came into play. And, we can argue that one till we're blue in the face. I know where my argument still is on that one and where it always will be. But beyond that, you just don't know. These races are tough to win. And everybody that, if you're driving on a Sunday, barring a couple unique situations, everybody out there is good enough to win, given the right circumstances and given the right breaks going their way. And I think back then equipment was a little bit different than what it is right now. Obviously, with the next gen cars, you mentioned, it's kind of even the playing field a little bit. But in terms of where I was at in my career, I didn't know if we'd ever win. And that particular year, Furniture Row was the team. We were growing. We were progressing rapidly with that race team. We had a great young engineer on the car at the time, whose name was Cole Pern, who I think we all know his backstory on where he progressed along onto. And we were just starting to find speed and starting to do a lot of things right. And, to get that when you kind of question if you're going to be able to get one or how it's all going to play out after you thought you had one already, and you kind of celebrated it for half a lap, and then they get on your radio and tell you to stop celebrating, that they're not sure what's going on. That was a big deal for me. In terms of if you could stay out now, given the current car on old tires, we were at a weird phase with Darlington. Darlington was it had been repaved, and I don't remember the timeline, but I want to say it was maybe 4 years prior to that. And it had gone through this repave. And we were kind of in the middle of that transition where the tires would fall off and aero didn't matter as much, or, things were just kind of at a transition phase with that racetrack. But in particular, that night, our race car was really, really good. Like it was fast. We had driven our way up to fifth. And felt like if we had a yellow, we had a shot regardless of how things were going to play out, just based on the lap times. So our best shot was to stay out. With the new car right now, with that racetrack having aged, let's see, that was 2011, so 10 more years. I don't know that you could even do it on 2 tires.
That's the other thing is Edwards took 2 tires. Like you don't hear that anymore. Someone taking 2 tires at Darlington, so. Brad stayed out. He had just 5-lap pressure tires than you did at that point. So I thought you were sitting duck. I'm not going to lie. I'm bitter. I had a lot on Casey Kane and Kyle Busch. I remember specifically where I was sitting. I was actually at the Caesars Sportsbook. I was excited to have my 25-1 on Casey Kane. And
so if you're bitter, I got to ask, do you remember what my odds were that night? Because I don't know.
I have no idea. I remember I ended up
probably in the field if I had to guess.
Well, yeah, probably. Then you would have been terrible odds. Like I can't bet the field at like 5-1, which is typically what they'd hang. Guys like that, just in case there's they have a sub driver come in and all of a sudden you have someone different in your car. So yeah, your odds would have been pretty big. But I mean, hey, I definitely cashed a big ticket on you when it was the Nationwide Series, when you were in the 7 car at Michigan. So had a lot of speed that day. I was very happy with your performance.
I'm glad we were able to make it up to you. It's and I remember that one actually. That one was probably a little more risky bet than what you even realized at the time, because we qualified 21st and it was all I had. I mean, I'm like, the car drove good. I don't know how to tell you make it go any faster. We were just slow, and then they dropped the green flag, and all of a sudden the car was at next level, which we did have downforce built into that car when some other people didn't necessarily. So that worked out good.
Yeah, now full transparency, though, Regan, I think you took some of that money back when you put your bumper to Alex Tagliani at Mid-Ohio back in that Xfinity Series race for Chris and I. So you helped mend fences, and then you took the fences down again. But we'll get into some of the road course racing out there. Wanted to get your perspective when you look at the start to the season. Obviously, the big talk was Chevrolet was far and away the best racing team that was out there. We saw how strong the Fords were in qualifying, and that obviously paid dividends in Atlanta. Ricky Stenhouse, for all intents and purposes, is the only real long shot that's won a race so far this season. So last year it was all about parity. Now we're starting to see the cream rise to the top. I mean, what has kind of been your biggest takeaway, either from a driver perspective, team perspective, or manufacturer through the first handful of races so far this season?
Well, I think it's almost to a certain extent too early right now to really, necessarily think that this guy or that guy's going to dominate yet. And I know that's crazy to say based on the performance William Byron's been putting off right now. And obviously Kyle Larson's had a ton of speed early on in the season. But there are some penalties out there looming above everybody. And I know that after those penalties and after those parts and pieces were taken, they still went out and stomped the field at Phoenix. But let's not forget, Kevin Harvick creeped into that picture in that race and showed, okay, as much of a deficit as it appears that the Fords may be at, he found a way to make his car fast. And I do think, much like last year, early on in the year, we looked at the Fords and it appeared that they were in big trouble last year. And lo and behold, by the time we got to the championship, guess what? The Fords were the ones to beat, and Joey Logano went out there and stomped them in Phoenix, when it all mattered and all counted. So I think right now, part of what we're seeing is a learning phase going on with the aero and the changes that were done on some of these cars over the offseason. Guys are figuring out where their cars are, where their cars are going to operate best at. And it's much like last year, it's pretty obvious that the Fords on the 1.5 miles are not going to have the level on the normal 1.5 miles, not like Atlanta, not a speedway 1.5 miles, but a true 1.5 mile intermediate track, are not going to have that same level of downforce and speed that the Chevys or Toyotas will have. And even the Toyotas don't appear to have what the Chevys have. But here's the kicker on all this, right? The path to the championship is no longer your 1.5 mile racetracks. That changed completely. It's your path to the championship is the road courses, the low downforce tracks, the short track package. That's where you get through and get to the championship now. And Phoenix is a low downforce racetrack, even though it's a mile, and some people call it a short track, some people call it an intermediate, whatever you want to call it. It's still going to be run with the low downforce package. So, I think we're pretty early in the season to just all of a sudden write off certain guys or get too carried away with the fact that we very easily could see 19 or 20 winners again this year still in it, and it wouldn't surprise any of us, because I think as the year goes on, that information trickles down quicker now. That box the box that teams can work within is smaller than it used to be. So therefore, the information to fill that box up gets out way quicker. And the garage is a small place. People talk. There's a lot of communication from team to team. There's a lot of teams that have now relationships with other teams that are strategic in terms of being able to place pit crew guys and do things like that. It's beneficial to them to share that information and help the other teams out. The thing that's caught me the most off guard, to answer your question, there's a long way to answer your question here, but
it's all great. It's all great info. The floor is yours. So by all means, go ahead. It's perspective that Chris and I can't get when we're looking at spreadsheets and practice laps. So that's for sure.
Well, sometimes the spreadsheets are smarter than we are too, though. The ones of us that are supposed to know that. So I definitely, I dive into the numbers as well on stuff. But I think that the one thing that's kind of surprised me a little bit is the fact that Stewart Haas has still appeared to struggle. You take Harvick out of the mix when it comes to Stewart Haas, and it hasn't been there for those guys. Some of it bad luck. Atlanta, a lot of that was bad luck. But I take Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta. When we do a sample size, I kind of take them out. I group them completely separately.
Yep.
And this is coming from a guy that loves speedway racing, right? I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think it's a skill that's got to be, it's in the playoffs. It's got to be a skill that we look at the same way as the other, as the other type of racetracks. But it also is its own beast when you look at overall raw speed for a company and where they're at. So, I think they've probably been my biggest disappointment. My second biggest disappointment, and I hate to pick on manufacturers, but would have to be Toyota, right? Like we expect Joe Gibbs Racing to come out of the gate winning races, dominating races, and they just haven't had that raw speed yet this year anywhere that we've gone. The Chevy teams as a whole, and Chevy, to their credit, has changed a lot of how they operate internally within the manufacturer, how they share information with each other, and what they do to build their drivers up and how they promote their young talent. And a lot of what they've done was as a response to how Toyota did things for so many years. And, I think now that we've seen them take how Toyota did things and shift their program and maybe sprinkle in some of their own ideas and thoughts into it, we're seeing a step up by them and certainly some good people that are, guiding the ship there, making the right decisions. But it is early in the year. And as you guys know, we've seen this happen time and time again, to where by the time we get halfway through the season, or if somebody happens to get caught doing something they're not supposed to be doing, there's, and that doesn't happen as much now as it used to back, 5 years ago, but there's also that element that could happen.
It's always amazing when you look at Chris, I'll give you the floor in a second. It's always amazing when you look at, obviously, the NASCAR season, the ebbs and flows that go into it, because people do become prisoners of the moment. They get caught in 5 race sample sizes and think that's going to be indicative of how the whole schedule is going to play out. And you constantly have to remind them that, hey, look, this isn't Formula One where we already know Red Bull is going to win the Constructors Championship. It's just a question of how they decide to invert the field. Put Max 20th, see if he can race all the way to first. That's the only reason to watch. On Sundays, they travel around the world. But Chris, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Kind of like, we talk about manufacturing. There's been a lot of talk about Chevy, but remember, Kyle Busch is in a Chevy now too. And I think it's really more Hendrick Motorsports that has really kind of stepped up and said, hey, we're running the best, because Kyle goes out and wins in Fontana, and then looks pretty average in practice at Vegas and gets a decent finish. Also looks pretty average in Phoenix and got lucky to get his Phoenix, or to get that finish. So I'm kind of curious, within race teams, we see it with SHR, and Ryan Prix and Chase Briscoe are good drivers. I trust them. And it's not like you have, kind of just an anomaly with some of these drivers, or they're new, or like when Suarez was there, or even when Custer was there. I mean, Ryan Prix and Chase Briscoe are proven guys. And Briscoe, I think if he gets out front on the same tires, he's going to be tough to pass. I don't care what racetrack you're at. So how do you, if you're just kind of looking at SHR as a whole, how do you really kind of quantify the difference between, the 4-car versus the 41 and the 14?
Well, that's a great one there. And that's one that I think we've juggled with for a number of years. And this goes back to prior to this new race car, right? Kevin was always light years above, it seemed like, the rest of the company, top 5s every week. And I think part of how you quantify that is Kevin Harvick is a elite talent. Here's a guy that's 47 years old, and he is still out there dominating races at 47 years old. How many times have we seen drivers get to that stage of their career, stick around too long, and just you forget how great they were because they did that? And for him to be doing that at this level right now is something that I think we're going to be talking about for a long time to come. And I honestly think, Kevin, if he can find a way to Phoenix, right? And I don't want to get in front of my skis too much right now, but Jeff Gordon's the last time we had a driver that could maybe have that possibility to go out on top on a retirement year. Unless you want to think about somebody who maybe retired during an off season that we didn't expect. But Jeff was the last guy that went to the championship race, was retiring, had all those emotions. And by the way, you're racing for a championship. And I think Kevin could maybe be the first guy to actually pull that off. Now, with all that said, with the old car, the way these companies operated, I feel like there was a lot of things that could get through tech, or a lot of things that a certain crew chief and car chief could work together on and pretty much maybe have an advantage. And if they wanted to share it throughout the company, they could. But if the company didn't ask them to share it throughout the company, then they didn't always have to. And some of it, to a certain extent, is art of war, right? Like there's some things that you don't want to tell your competition, even if they're under the same roof as you, because loose lips sink ships, right? And if you got something that is a huge advantage, you keep that within, because it is still a competitive sport. Even though you're teammates, you're still racing them. They still want to take food off your plate. You want to take food off their plate ultimately. With this car, though, that's not as much the case. And, I think it just gets down to those relationships with the drivers and the crew chiefs and the field that the drivers are looking for. In Ryan Preece's case, because I've got a lot of faith in him as a race car driver.
Yeah, I do too.
In his case, I think what you're seeing right now is the early season learning the new race car. You got a crew chief in Chad Johnston who was not working on this cup car, this rendition of a cup car last year.
Right.
You got a driver who, while he did, I think it was 3, maybe 4 races last year, just doesn't have a huge sample size of experience driving this car to know exactly what he wants. I think those two examples give him a little bit more time. Briscoe's more of a mind blower for me this year. Because he actually last year was the first time that we saw somebody maybe, in terms of Stuart Haas, that could give Harvick a run for his money and really did for the majority of the season. I think there was a good, 3/4 of that season. You make the argument Chase Briscoe was the best car in that company. And we're not seeing that out of him right now. And we didn't see it at Phoenix, even although he had a decent run, a track that he won a year ago.
But he kind of stole that finish. Both of those other Stuart Haas cars really weren't great cars and found themselves kind of with great finishes late.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely won't disagree with that, but it was the most speed he's shown this year to this point. And Briscoe is another guy. He's a good race car driver. Now, if we go to Bristol Dirt here in a couple weeks and Briscoe's not up in the top 5, then we're pushing the panic button. We're saying, okay, we're sound some alarms on this one.
Yeah, I mean, a big contract extension, obviously expected to be that heir apparent once Kevin Harvick hangs it up. It'll be very interesting to see how the season progresses for the 14 for sure. And it's interesting, Regan, you mentioned loose lips sinking ships, and it reminds me of something someone told me about the 78 team when Martin Truex won the championship for Furniture Row. They said the thing that worked in their favor was the fact that they were out in Colorado. They weren't going to the same bars. They weren't sharing any nuggets with some of the race teams around the spoke in Charlotte, and it paid dividends for them there. So it's always interesting to hear what can change as far as information, both within teams and externally. You brought up schedules a little bit earlier, and we'll get a chance to go to road course for the first time this weekend at COTA. I guess the first question before we drill down a bit more, scheduling of races has always been a hot button topic. I know there was a lot of pushback from the traditionalists when they started to integrate more and more road courses. Do you think we have the perfect mix now? Would you like to see the championship race rotated through? Because back in the day when Chris introduced me to betting on NASCAR, Sonoma and Watkins Glen were essentially throwaways other than for road course ringers, because it wasn't going to have much impact on who was ultimately going to win the series championship.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a road racer at heart, right? So I genuinely enjoy road racing. I think the more the merrier. I think these cars mesh up really nicely to road racing. When we talk schedule, obviously there's I think the number 6 or 7 road courses on there this year, without knowing off the top of my head. And could we do more? I think we could do more. I personally do. I personally think this car has been designed as a road racing vehicle, and it's very good on a course like that. What I'm curious about is what it looks like on a street course and what takes place when we get to Chicago and we do that. And
Chris is nervous, Regan. I can tell you already. He's worried about the quality of racing we're going to see on the streets of Chicago.
I see him shaking his head already. And let me tell you what, you think you're nervous. Imagine if you're one of the drivers that has to, mail it off at 170 in one of those corners for the first time, how nervous they're going to be. So, I think that if that goes well, that opens up a whole new world for us, right? We went to the Coliseum last year in LA, and I think we were all nervous about that. And it turned out to be awesome. This year back to more of what we expected last year with the beating and banging, but that's a year under their belts. The competition was much closer. The cars were closer. The drivers knew what to expect out of this car. So, I think that's what kind of brought on some of the more challenging, situations on the tight corners and everything like that. I don't think we're in a bad spot with the schedule right now. I think we kind of got away from some of these 1.5 mile tracks as we talked earlier in the show just a little bit. Yeah. That we're maybe getting too cookie cutter. We got a dirt track in there. We've got a little bit of everything for anybody that you could possibly want. If they mix it up some more, it doesn't hurt my feelings one way or another. I think a place like North Wilkesboro, a place like Nashville, getting back to the roots just a little bit is great if those end up as points races. If for some reason we can take the Clash concept, right, I've got no problem with turning that into a points race somewhere. You go up to New York City and find a stadium you can put, built racetracks in. Why not? We know we can build a racetrack in 3 months now and run a race on it, and it's going to be fine, and the asphalt's not going to tear up, and we're going to find, we're going to make a show that looks pretty good. It opens up a lot of possibilities. And that's kind of leads me into how I feel about the championship race. As much as I love it being at Phoenix, because it just has a big event feel when you pull up to the racetrack and when you drive into the racetrack and the place is full. That needs to move around every year. And I've been saying this for a while now, that my belief is that the championship, or at minimum every 3 years. I don't know how they want to work the contracts with this, because there are a lot of other details that you have to work
for sure.
You got, in terms of racetracks and how certain years we're doing contracts with racetracks different than we are other years. And I don't even know all that, and I wouldn't pretend to understand all that. But I think if we got to a world in my eyes to where that race moved around every year, and it was, maybe it's, I don't know, Austin one year and we run Circuit of the Americas. Maybe it's Homestead and we go to Miami one year and run that track. Maybe we go Phoenix, Vegas. You got to look to the southern section of the country because of weather that time of year, which gets me to my next thing is we should be ending the season in September anyways, before football season starts. We should be done, Labor Day weekend should be the end of the racing season, and you could end that championship race anywhere in this country, Canada, Mexico, wherever you want to, because the weather's still good.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you about COTA, but I think you mentioning football provides an even better segue since it is a gambling show and all of that. It's clearly become a major focal point to increase fan engagement across all sports. NASCAR, obviously, no different with some of their initiatives, the partnerships we've seen with the league itself, and obviously individual race teams with some of the wraps that are out there. When you guys were out there every week, I mean, you said you weren't sure of the price when you ended up grabbing the checkered flag for the Southern 500. Did you feel the drivers, crew chiefs, or other race personnel knew what some of the prices were? Or was it just, hey, this guy's got a hot rod, that's the car to beat? We weren't exactly sure. I'm coming into the race going, you know what? I'm going to take that underdog mentality, 30-1. I'm going to show those bettors and odds makers that I got a much better machine that I can place inside the top 5 or the top 10.
I don't think that, as a competitor or somebody in the garage, I don't think that you had to know what those numbers were. You knew if you were underdog or a favorite before you even went to the racetrack. And I think that that's the part of the interesting part about the mentality of the sport, right? Is you just, when you're in it all day, every day, you know who the favorites are, you know who the more talented, whether it's driver teams or whatever it may be, or which teams have speed at different times. And again, there was a lot more variation. You go back 10, 15 years ago, and the variation was drastically different than what it is right now as to what teams were doing, on a given year. Right now, we look at last year and all bets are off. Again, with 19 winners and 20 if you count Blaney, who won the All-Star race, which I personally count that, but that's a whole nother argument. It's a lot different right now, and the world that we live in terms of noticing that is different. I don't personally believe. And there may be crew guys that can tell you every number on every guy in terms of their odds on any given weekend, but I just don't think they pay that much attention to it. It is, even as a driver, you're so damn busy that you don't have time to really if I got 5 minutes to research something, and I mean this not in a bad way, but if I got 5 minutes to research something throughout the course of the week when I'm driving, I'm hopping on, something else basically, and essentially I'm going to look and pay more attention to, SMT or data or news or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always
I've
interesting.
noticed that.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say, whenever I'm at the racetrack and I'm just asking, like, it seems like you guys had a good car over the long run, and like the tire changer's like, oh, we were? Like, I'm just worried about the tires, man. Like,
yeah,
just kind of move on. And then there's so much, so much money in the sport that like winning is just, it's so important. Even like one spot, over the longevity of the season, when it comes to the money towards the end. I mean, that's your livelihood. I kind of want to switch it up a little bit and talk this week at COTA. I mean, we have some big names this week. And, I'm curious your take on just the names that are in this, and then how will they fare? We got Button, Kimmy, Jordan Taylor, and Johnson. And I guess if you want to throw in, kind of a wild card or something else that you could talk about, I am heavily invested in Kyle Busch futures. So
here we go again.
bias.
Every episode has got to bring this up, Regan.
Like,
this is the same broken record bullshit I got to deal with every single week about Worm trying to make a case for Kyle Busch to win every single race, even if he was driving in reverse, starting 36th in the field.
Okay.
Oh, well, I can always make a case for. I can always make a case for Kyle Busch. So there's absolutely no denying that. And, I think that Kyle's in a car that won 2 road courses a year ago, right? With Tyler Reddick behind the wheel of it. I think that we would all say Tyler Reddick and Kyle Busch. Are you going to pick which one's the better talent, right? I mean, if you go by the numbers, obviously it's Kyle Busch. And if you go by the body of work and the history, Kyle's perhaps arguably, you put him in the top 5 of the greatest of all time to drive a stock car. So with that said, he's in a car that won 2 of them and a car that was very fast in this race a year ago. I don't know that I would go picking against him right now. I do think that team is still learning just a little bit about what he wants and what he needs, versus maybe what Tyler, who they had been with for the past, if you count Xfinity, I think they had the 3 or 4 years together now at this point. So I think there's a certain element of that they're working through at this point, but certainly he'll be good. But, when you look at the guys that are coming in, and a couple F1 champions and a 7-time NASCAR champion and all the rest of these guys, I think probably the most uphill battle is likely going to be for Jenson Button, unfortunately, because he has 0 experience in a stock car like this. And I don't mean this to, say he's not going to go out there and do great, because he very potentially could, but 0 stock car experience. He's going to have a lot to learn in a short amount of time to learn it. Whereas Kimi Kimi Räikkönen does have at least some stock car experience. He's sat behind the wheel of these things and knows a little bit of what to expect. He ran a race last year. I believe it was Watkins Glen, if memory serves me correct. So maybe a little bit more of a less uphill battle for him. Jimmy Johnson, I mean, listen, it's Jimmy, right? Nothing is going to surprise me there, but a lot has changed since he stepped away. And it's one thing to go to Daytona, your first race back, and have success and have speed, which he did have in that race. It's a whole nother thing to come to Circuit of the Americas, a track where he has never even run the old Cup car at. I don't know his experience on this racetrack off the top of my head, but I think it's very limited. That's a whole nother thing, even with the simulation and everything else. And then who's the last one I'm missing? I'm drawing a blank here.
Jordan Taylor running for the 9 car.
So Jordan's the one that I'm most intrigued by. And I'm intrigued by it because when you look at what he's been capable of doing in all different types of cars, and predominantly he has been in closed fender cars, the majority of what he's driven, to my knowledge, he's been fast in everything, and he finds a way to go fast in everything. Now you plug him into the company that appears to have the most speed right now at Hendrick Motorsports this year, and in particular, a race car that has been very good on the road courses, and I believe won Circuit of the Americas 2 years ago with Chase Elliott. Now all of a sudden, if I got that right, I might have that wrong, but now all of a sudden, you're thinking, okay, maybe he can hop in there and go fast. The other thing is there's a lot of testing that he's been doing. I think he's been working with a number of these Cup drivers on the outside, even though he hasn't necessarily been in the car, he's been around it, and he's been, working with these guys, helping them get better. So He'd be my biggest wild card out of all those guys right now, I think, honestly, because if he finishes 30th, it won't surprise me. And if he wins, it won't surprise me.
I know we've run a little bit longer than anticipated, but one final question from me, Regan, on road course racing with the changes. How much different do you think it'll look and feel with no defined stage breaks? I know Chris has gone back and watched film as far as 2016 that we'll get to later when we handicap the race from our perspective to figure out how much that changes the dynamic of what some of the expectations are, both from a team and a driver standpoint, and how everybody is going to approach this with that unique tweak to some of the rules that we've grown accustomed to.
I think it changes everything, because before it was always you kind of planned the race out based around the cautions that you knew were going to come out when they were going to come out. And if you did get a wild card caution, you just kind of went with it and didn't worry about it. Right. And if you looked at the last stage, I think last year it was a one-stop sequence in the final stage of the race here for Circuit of the Americas this weekend. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to bring into, okay, do we want to two-stop this race? Do we want to three-stop this race? I think that, on paper, you'd say we're going to two-stop this race and kind of run it like an F1 race. But then if you throw a caution out there, or if we're getting way more tire fall off this weekend than what we anticipate, now you're three-stopping it. Does anybody go really off the rails and four-stop it? Do they, do the computers tell them, and a lot of this stuff's getting analyzed as they're on the track running, do the computers say, hey, guess what? There's a possibility if we don't get any yellows that aren't timed to our favor, that we can four-stop this and be 20 seconds ahead at the end of this race. So I think it's kind of gonna be a little bit trial by fire again, because a lot of this stuff these teams are working on it as the race is going on. Until they see the actual race fall, they'll have a pretty good idea after practice Friday as to what sequence they want to run it in. But then the other wild card to all of it is if you get a caution, somebody gets stuck in the tire barrier, or somebody oils down the racetrack, somebody has debris all over the racetrack. Every strategy, you can throw it out the window, and everybody's got to change, and now you're deleting the whole thing. So I do think that that change is going to be a drastic one. I can't sit here and tell you who it would favor and who wouldn't. It wouldn't favor. I think no matter what, the car out front's who it favors, right? Because you can kind of dictate the strategy at that point. And we saw it. I can't remember the year. I want to say it was 2018, maybe we saw it, or 2017. We saw it at Sonoma, where Truex appeared that he was going to be on I believe a three-stop strategy, and their guys got on the wall. They baited all the competition. Yeah, they faked them out. And once everybody pitted, their guys got off the wall, took their helmets off again, and they continued to run for 15 more laps, and they end up winning by 20 seconds or whatever it was, because they threw everybody a curveball there. So who knows? Maybe we'll see some cool stuff like that too.
But if the caution comes out there, Truex is going to be stuck, because he still had to pit. If the caution does come out while they're, faking out the field, then they're going to have to go back to 10th. Yeah, they'll have fresher tires. But, there's so much that can happen in a road course race. Look at Chris Bell winning at the Roval by taking tires when no one was going to take tires. And then 2 cautions later, it's like, well, Chris Bell's the favorite. So as much as you want to...
you want to talk about somebody that flies under the radar, right? That is... And even when you look at everything he did at the end of the year last year, I know there was some good opportunity and good luck in there. That is the one car that I've kind of got highlighted right now. Last year at the start of the season, they had miserable luck. And when I was looking back at the COTA race this morning, I think he finished 4th or 5th in that race a year ago. And that was what kind of got the ball rolling the right direction for that team. And they've been going ever since. You make the argument that they've been the best team at JGR just about since that time. And certainly outperforming his teammates at the start of this year right now when I look at it.
Yeah, pretty wild. I mean, you mentioned Christopher Bell quietly put together 4 top 6 finishes so far this year while the rest of his teammates are struggling. And unfortunately for us, odds makers priced him like the cup contender he was last year. We were hoping we were going to get him on the drift, but alas, that is the life we lead. Chris, I wasn't sure if you had anything else for Regan. He's been so gracious with his time, obviously going longer than we anticipated. Encourage all of our loyal listeners to follow Regan on Twitter at Regan Smith. But Chris, the floor is yours if you want to hit him with any hard-hitting information before we let him go.
No, just thanks for winning Michigan. It definitely recouped, the losses that we suffered with Tagliani, and then that big win at Darlington. But hey, that's awesome. You have a crown jewel, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And by the way, it's crazy. I bet on the sport for a living, so It's interesting how much it parallels. Like when I have money on you, I'm like, man, you need to pit and take 4 tires. And it's like, you stay out. I'm like, oh my gosh, like rent gone. Like,
isn't it? It's so crazy. After I got done driving and I started paying more attention to the odds and the numbers and quite honestly, fantasy and everything else like that. It is amazing how much more in tune you get with the sport. Even me watching football, like I don't know the first thing about football, but damn it, I'm a head coach when I got money on the line. I'm telling you exactly what they need to do. But I appreciate you guys having me on. It's been fun. And certainly we need to do it again soon.
Oh, especially knowing that, then we'll get you back closer to the playoffs and football season, talk a little bit about the NFL kicking off, some of your favorite teams and such. But we can only hope, Regan, that you get a chance this week maybe to interview a Cup driver who decides to park on the start-finish line to create a little bit more controversy and drama. Safe travels to Coda this weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you on the Fox broadcast. I can't thank you again enough for being so generous with your time today.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it.
Great stuff from Regan Smithworm. And I'm never sure when we invite these guests on, it's probably on me, where I go, yeah, we're going to take you about 15 or 20 minutes of your time. It ends up turning into a 30 to 40-minute marathon that we actually record. And then inevitably what comes out of that is a discussion, a more candid conversation between us and our guests that'll, unfortunately for our Stay Green listeners, never actually make it to air.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, too, is, I have a history with Regan Smith, and I just can't help myself to talk about, when I've either won money or lost money with a driver. And so to actually talk about that, and, congratulations to him on winning that Southern 500. It was awesome and very unexpected. The fact that he was able to stay out on old tires and win a race at Darlington seems like, something out of just a history book. And it had to have been, because that just would never happen. And then to see guys take 2 tires at Darlington is also something that just goes to show you how much these tracks wear out. But I'll tell you what, Regan is a super informed guy, and really, really great to talk to. Couldn't have been more gracious with his time. So hopefully we can have him back, especially I think towards, the playoffs. I think it'd be really good to have him out. I loved what he had to say about Stuart Haas and kind of the difference in Kevin Harvick in the 41 and the 14. And, I had never thought, like, you raise the alarm bell or hit the alarm bell when Chase Briscoe struggles on a dirt track. That's when it's all hands on deck. We got a problem here. So I thought that was a great piece of information that we can take away and hopefully use that to maybe make some money in the future here. And
full disclosure, that was an interview we recorded on Tuesday. We recorded the bulk of the rest of the podcast on Wednesday night, and we actually had booked Regan Smith well in advance of the impromptu finish line interview with Josh Williams that has obviously swept the nation. The penalty for Josh Williams, a 1-race suspension, had not been issued when we had Regan on, but tremendous content there, and it was great to get his perspective as Regan was checking in with his spotters, figuring out, can I interview him here? Does he have to go to the infield care center? I got to make sure I follow protocols. So great perspective, and the kind of things that you and I don't actually get to see or be a part of, obviously, when we're watching most of these races from home. But obviously everyone here is for Stage 3, and that's where we break down the upcoming race this weekend. And of course, as we mentioned at the top of the show, that will take us to Circuit of the Americas. Track size 3.41 miles. We're going to race 68 laps. Track type multi-elevational counterclockwise road course, whatever the hell that means. I didn't pay much attention in school. Number of turns at 20. But Worm, there is a key distinction that everyone should know when we go road course racing in 2023.
Well, yeah, no cautions at stage breaks. I had to go back to 2016 to watch a few road courses, just to have an idea of what the strategy looks like. We're so used to having these set cautions that it's a real wrinkle, or lack of a wrinkle, to kind of handicap the races this year and just get an idea of the flow of a road course race without cautions. And that's a massive, massive difference. I think, most teams are just going to work their way backwards. Once they're in a pit window, I think you're going to see teams pit. Obviously, if you can get your stage points, depending on where these pit windows fall, it will have a better idea of this on Friday once they actually know fuel mileage after practice. But you're going to work your way backwards until there's a curveball. And those curveballs could be an untimely caution, kind of right around the pit window or near a stage break, right? You have to make the decision whether you're going to forfeit track position and pick up stage points or not pick up stage points and inherit track position, or if you're just going to stay out and take those take the points and not the track position. Boy, that's kind of hard to say, Todd.
I was going to say that 10 times real fast again for us with the tees, the tires, the track position, and everything else that's involved with all of it.
Well, speaking of tires, this is another thing where new tires this year that we haven't seen. Also, you're going to have the lower downforce package, which did promote a little bit more tire wear, which I thought was great at Phoenix. Even though you could say it was kind of a boring race, it was still a little bit more passing than we'd seen in the past. But also tire wear, it changes everything completely. If we see a lot of fall off at this track, you're going to see a 3-stop strategy or maybe even a 4-stop strategy if tires do matter. Now, we're not quite sure if that's the case, but tires and caution really change the complexity of the strategy. But everyone has this idea, this plan that, hey, we're just going to 2-stop it until they see these changes. And, I haven't really heard anything else, but, Friday's practice will give us a lot of information moving forward in the weekend.
The one thing we do have, one data point, albeit somewhat useless in my opinion. We had a couple of prominent drivers test here back in January. There wasn't anything that you could really call actionable from reading some of the comments and quotes that came out of that. But as we look at road courses, I think it's always easy for handicappers to default to what they saw last year. And of course, Chevrolet was the top team on road courses a season ago. Took 5 out of the 6 wins on them. Toyota, despite their Roval win in October, struggled a ton and were the worst of the 3 manufacturers. We'll get into Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex specifically a little bit later. We break down individual drivers. Some of those struggles didn't necessarily apply to Christopher Bell, but it was the inaugural year for the next-gen car. They have a little bit more data. There is no doubt Toyota spent all sorts of time working on their aero, trying to figure out what they missed on at those road courses last year. But the reality of it, the weather forecast this weekend may not be all that favorable. And when you talk about tires and everything else, let's throw another variable into the equation as we try and figure out how to handicap this thing.
Yeah, I can't wait for it to rain and basically just throw everything out the window. And, I'm hoping we get a dry race. I think that's the best for the fans. And also, okay, it might not be best for the fans. That's super subjective. But for us handicappers, it's way better. That gives us kind of a roadmap for the rest of the year when it comes to these road courses. Chris Bell, I think if I could actually somehow articulate what he did last year on road courses, is he took the worst manufacturer, in my opinion, on the road courses and got the most out of those finishes. And he won a road course when he needed to. Now, he did have tires, but Chris Bell has done just a phenomenal job this season of getting good finishes outside of the anomaly at Fontana, and we have 3rd, 5th, 6th, and then 3rd again at Atlanta. Chris Bell just kind of putting together one of those seasons where it's like, hey, he's just not making many mistakes. And if he gets a race-winning car, we all know he can win. And he's kind of setting himself up for, in my opinion, a potential championship run season. This guy has all sorts of talent. And I think that if the Toyotas struggle again, I'm going to preface this. If the Toyota struggle again, I anticipate Chris Bell being the top Toyota. However, if they are decent, there's a couple other guys I think we should keep an eye on.
All right, let's start with Christopher Bell then, because normally we start with favorites and work our way down the board. But given what some of the information that Regan gave us, you talking about Christopher Bell and kind of being the outlier for some of Toyota's struggles last year, seeing his price, consensus right around 15-1, upwards of 18-1. His average road course finish last year was just outside the top 10, but of course that comes with noise in the numbers, knowing how poorly he performed at Sonoma. 3rd at COTA last year, won the Roval, and all of those different things factor in. So when you look at his current pricing, fair or foul for a guy that we think, if Toyota's got it figured out, could be the driver to watch?
I just think if Toyota has it figured out, I don't think he's the driver to watch. I think if the Toyota struggle, he's going to be the best Toyota. I just think, he does have 2 road course wins. If you remember the first road course he ran in the Cup Series, he ended up winning at the Daytona road course. So he obviously has a ton of talent. I just haven't seen enough out of the Toyotas to really get involved at a shorter price, which we're seeing Chris Bell, kind of the lowest odds of all the Toyotas. I'd rather wait and see. Just if he unloads well in practice, I'm okay unloading at 8-1. But I still want to see these Toyotas. They were out to lunch for the most part. Like I said last year, yes, he did win the Roval, but that was with fresh tires in a must-win scenario. He was super aggressive on restarts, and I don't even think he wins without the final caution after he took the tires. So, yes, I do think he'll be the best if Toyotas struggle. However, I think there's other guys that will be better if the Toyotas unload fast this year.
By the way, I was delinquent in my host responsibilities. Obviously, we look for track comps, and I don't want to say it's fair to go, hey, look, a road course is a road course is a road course. So I want to get your perspective there. The one thing I will share with our listeners, I threw out the Indy road course. That was an abomination last year, and I did not use that as a viable data point for any of my early week handicapping here.
Yeah, I would say, you can kind of look at the road courses as a whole, but I think Sonoma kind of also stands alone. And then if you look at the Indy road course last year, I mean, it was kind of a cluster. I will say this about COTA. It kind of set the season. I was super optimistic for road courses after watching that race. You had guys like Dinger start at the back and work his way to the front. You saw passing, and I was excited. And so, but then we didn't see that at any other road course. We saw just basically a conveyor belt going around the track. And, if there was a pass, it was it was almost like a Formula One race. Oh my gosh, there was a pass in the top three. Like, you just didn't see it, especially in a green flag condition. So I guess to add one last thing to Chris Bell, he did have that third at COTA last year, but it was kind of an afterthought. If you think about Suarez, I think had a better car than him, but he exited after stage one, at least being competitive. And you look at the way that, Allmendinger finished, the last car in the lead lap. I think he was a fifth place car at very best, but nonetheless, still a good finish for him. And like I said, that just kind of stays consistent with him getting great finishes out of his race cars.
Well, you mentioned AJ Allmendinger, almost like you've done this before, provides a perfect segue into a driver that we don't talk about as a very relevant factor at traditional mile-and-a-half tracks, but very relevant when you look at Dinger's success as a road course expert. Last year at COTA, he was involved in the tight racing that you alluded to on the final lap with Ross Chastain and Alex Bowman before Chastain ultimately grabbed the checkered flag. Last two starts at COTA, fifth place a year ago, 33rd, two starts prior. That was mired with a little bit of rain. Best seasonal finish so far this year, 6th. 12 of his 17 career Cup Xfinity Series wins have come on road courses, including the Xfinity Series race here last March. When you look at AJ Allmendinger's price, 12-1 on the low end in the outright market, upwards of 15-1. Does he intrigue you at all as you look to build your early week portfolio?
Well, I think AJ Allmendinger can win. I think you hit the nail on the head, when discussing this before we came live here, and this is one of his 6 chances to win this year. I kind of expected AJ to run a little better than he has this year. He has one decent finish at Daytona. Other than that, he doesn't have a top 15. I expected him with his experience to run better, especially after we saw at Homestead, which is a high tire wear track, and takes a real wheelman to go out there and run well. I expected him to run a little better, and we just haven't seen it out of that 16 car. But you know what? He'll be there. I can tell you right now that AJ Allmendinger will be in the mix this weekend. It's just a matter of, are we going to see the fireworks and him starting from the rear, or are we going to see a snoozer where he goes out there, potentially pulls it, and leads every lap, and we stay green the entire time? That could happen.
I will bet the no on the entire race staying green for 68 laps. So I'm going to bet the no, and I'm willing to lay whatever price you want to offer. So we can talk
bold.
off air and transact a little bit of business. When we look at road course racers, no discussion is complete, obviously, without talking about Austin Cindric in this bucket as well. Very talented in this discipline, and you look at how he performed on the road courses last year. An 8th place, 5th place, 7th place, 2nd place, and then 2 finishes outside the top 10. Average finish on road courses last year was just outside the top 10, but odds makers know that, and you see Austin Cindric, driver of the 2 car, priced at 15-1.
Austin was great last year, and he was great the year before that in the few chances he had to run with Penske. And listen, Cindric's he's as good a road course racer as there is out there. I guess you could say that's kind of his specialty. But even when he struggles with this tire fall off, he can still make it work at road courses. He's just really good at outbraking guys, and he's someone that I trust on road courses. If he does make a mistake and goes to the rear, he's a guy that can work his way back up through the field. So many times you see that where, you take a guy for maybe like a William Byron who has a ton of speed. When he's out front, he's going to be great on these road courses. Put him back in a little traffic, he's going to struggle. Whereas these road course ringers, and I would put Cindric in that road course ringer, he's able to drive back through the front, maybe not, from last place to first, but he can work himself back into a race in a 15-lap run. And that's why I do like a guy like Austin Cindric at a track like this.
Well, I mean, you mentioned William Byron, and we may as well talk about him and one of his HMS teammates. I want to carve out a separate distinction for the pre-race favorite in Kyle Larson. But when you look at William Byron, 12-1, you can shop around and find slightly better out there in the market. Alex Bowman a little bit further down the odds board in that 20-1 range, and Bowman was one of only 4 drivers to have back-to-back top 10 finishes here. Best finish this year so far, 3rd in Las Vegas. Byron, we know, is the greatest thing since sliced bread until he ran into the super speedway at Atlanta. Still looking to lead his first lap. Dakota and Worm, I get the excitement, I get the energy that Byron has shown a track record for being competitive, but to see a price at 12-1, you obviously have to have a legitimate thought that he can win this kind of race, and he didn't have a top 5 in any of the 6 road course races last season. I can't be hypocritical, though, and say I'm leaning on those data points to dictate the decisions I want to make here, but this felt a little bit short to me compared to how some of the other drivers in that subset are being priced.
100% overvalued at this point. I mean, yeah, the recency bias, you'd say, hey, he's had more speed than anybody, and I do think that he will qualify well and get up front. What I don't think is if he does get mired back in traffic, Byron doesn't just slice through the field. You know, he's had good qualifying in those 2 wins and was able to take the lead early on in races and get in the flow and understand, you know, what his car needs out front. He has not found himself back in traffic yet, and if there's a situation where that happens, I don't see him slicing through the field. Someone like Austin Cindric or Allmendinger would be able to. So, you know, do I think he can go out there and put it on the pole and lead a lot of laps? Yeah. Do I think if this stays kind of a clean race, he can stay in the top 3 all day? Absolutely. But if we find ourselves in a bunch of restarts or it gets a little hairy, I just don't see William Byron kind of, you know, coming out of that smelling like a rose. I just don't think that. I could be wrong. I didn't think he was going to have the run he had at Phoenix, and he went out there and was super fast early in the race, and then obviously a great restart, but with the help of the 45 and the 12, basically putting Larson in a terrible spot at Phoenix, and, you know, the 24 comes away with the victory. But he certainly was fast early on at Phoenix, and I expect him to do something similar this week, where he's going to be fast early. If he avoids trouble, he could be there at the end. But if he finds himself, you know, in 15th or 17th place, I think it could be difficult for that 24 team.
Any expectations for his teammate in the 48, Alex? Yeah, Alex Bowman. Yeah. It's easy for me to say.
Well, I'll tell you what. Bowman's kind of sneaky putting together a really solid season. He hasn't had the speed, I guess, that front-end speed that we're talking about with the 5 and the 24. But, man, 5th, 8th, 3rd, 9th, and 14th at Atlanta. I mean, a sneaky, solid season for the 48 team. And I'll tell you what, he's running this truck race this weekend. And like I say every time, if you run an Xfinity or a truck race, you know, the day or 2 before a cup race, you're one adjustment ahead. I feel like you just kind of understand where the track tends to go. And obviously he was in the mix last year. I mean, he had a chance to win this race, and I trust Alex Bowman. When he's out front, he's going to get it done. So I do think that if there's some value on a guy, you know, it's that Alex Bowman. But he also hasn't qualified incredibly well, so I don't know that we're getting the best price right now. I think you kind of wait till after qualifying, and I think you'll see the same price, but know he's better after seeing practice. I think that's when you want to jump on Alex Bowman. But, you know, he does a great job of taking average race cars and getting decent finishes, where I think William Byron, he takes fast cars and wins races, but he also takes bad cars and gets bad finishes. So I'm optimistic on this 48.
It's not like these words will ever come back to haunt me. Alex Bowman right now, to use a parallel to horse racing, feels like a guy that you always want to tie into your exotics. You're not necessarily putting him up top to win, but you think he can hit the back end of the board with a podium finish or finish top 5. So I'm very curious to see how he unloads. But when we look at the Hendrick Motorsports camp, all discussions start with Kyle Larson, who won at Watkins Glen on the road last year and had a winning race car at Road America before he got passed late by Tyler Reddick. Finished second to Chase Elliott in 2021, obviously all about the rain, but anytime we go to a road course, anytime we go to a mile and a half, look, the 5 car is very much in the calculus. I'm just not sure at 7-1 or thereabouts. He's a guy you have to run a bet early in the week.
Yeah. Listen, can Larson win here? Absolutely, he can. I don't trust him as much here as I do at a place like Watkins Glen. I feel like this is a little bit more technical. And, you know, that is kind of crazy because I look at Sonoma as the most technical track, and he should have won that race last year and, of course, couldn't get a wheel that lug tight, so he lost a wheel. But, you know, he's another guy I'd rather see unload well and then take him at maybe a 5 or 6 to 1 if he looks really, really good in practice. But I'm not rushing at this point in the week. So much can happen when it comes to strategy. If you throw rain into the mix, I certainly don't think that having the favorite is where you want to be right now.
By the way, not to go off on a tangent because I know you're happily married, but let me tell you, you did it the right way probably with a very short engagement, a quick wedding. Because this wedding has done nothing but given the green light to my better half to have package after package after package delivered. And so if it's an omen by any stretch, we just had a FedEx truck pull up in front. So maybe we have to make a small investment on the...
and Denny?
Yeah, on the FedEx 11 Toyota Camry in this capacity. We'll get to Denny in a matter of minutes, though. But when we continue to talk about favorites, 3 other drivers that I want to hit on, at least in some capacity, those being Ross Chastain, the winner of this race last year, albeit differently priced now, less than 10 to 1 compared to the 40 to 1 crumbs that we nibbled on a season ago. Kyle Busch driving the car that was extremely fast on the road, previously driven by Tyler Reddick, and Reddick in the 45. Can he be the driver to break through if Toyota has speed? Chastain, Busch, and Reddick. Again, a trio of favorites, very short prices out there. Quick snippets on those guys.
Yeah, I'll briefly talk about Ross Chastain. I don't think you touch this 8 to 1 price. I think that betting Ross Chastain before qualifying at this point in the year is a waste of time because, if you look at this race last year, he was great in practice and still qualified 16th. Yeah, he went out there and was able to pass a lot of cars and win the race, but, he was really good in practice, and it was no shock, at least to me after seeing practice times, that he had some capabilities, at least to get up into that top 3. Whether he was going to pull it off or not, I wasn't quite sure. But I think at this point, Chastain tends to punt on qualifying, and we'll just get him, maybe later in the week after he, it qualifies between, 8th and 12th would be my guess. And I think we'll see a better price there, especially if you see Larson or Byron qualify really, really well. Remember that, the goal is to pick off value early in the week and then slam prices that you see value after practice and qualifying. I'm not that excited about Chastain, at least this point in the season. Can he win the race? Absolutely. Or at this point in the week, can he win the race? Absolutely. Like I said, we're still looking at prices right now, not trying to pick the car we think is going to win the race. When it comes to these other two, this is the most intriguing, duo this weekend. It's Kyle Busch and Tyler Reddick, and you know what? I have no idea. This is the thing. This is the one that everyone's kind of looking towards. Like, everyone was wondering last year, is it the car or is it the driver? And with Tyler Reddick, he was obviously super competitive on these road courses last year. If you take Kyle Busch and you put him in that car, you think that he just goes out there, leads a ton of laps, and wins the race. At least the 2 races that Tyler Reddick won, and maybe more. But, I know that Kyle won at Fontana, but what I have not seen is a dominant race car by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like he's been probably a 10th place car in practice and qualifying, and is getting these kind of 8 to 12th place finishes, which is great for him because I feel like the basement's much higher than it was last year, whereas at Toyota last year, he could run 25th, and whatever happened at Martinsville, I've never seen that before towards the end of the season. Whereas this year, his bad finishes are now right around that 10th place. So I do think that he's definitely improved his situation, and whether or not it was a promotion to go to the 8, I still think it kind of was, but this week will tell us, because the Toyotas last year really struggled at road courses. Now you have Tyler Reddick in a road course coming off of a 2-win road course season. This is a great head-to-head matchup. I'm super curious as to what happens. Tyler Reddick had a great finish at Phoenix, albeit he did take 4 tires and had an extra chance at a restart. Probably stole a little bit of a finish there. Kyle struggled. I think he also kind of stole a finish because he was a lap down there for a while. I am not rushing to bet either one of these guys. If I had to lean on someone, it would be Kyle Busch over Tyler Reddick, but that's only because of Toyota last year. I cannot imagine that Toyota is going to struggle as much on road courses this year as they did last year, but time will tell, and I'm really excited to see who kind of comes out on top, the 45 or the 8 this week.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. One of those fights within the fights, and whatever it is, styles make fights to see if it's the equipment, if it's the driver, or a variety of other factors. That'll no doubt be a very interesting storyline to follow come Sunday's race. When we look a little further down the board, I guess we can call this bucket of drivers the long shots there. And I know Brad Keselowski is getting a lot of buzz. I don't know if I'm necessarily buying into some of the buzz that's out there. When I look at his price, there's no doubt current form significantly better than what we saw last year, but he's priced right alongside his teammate in Chris Buescher at 30-1. I mean, Brad, no top 10s on road courses last year, but a bunch in that 10 to 20 range. Had a chance to win a race last week, so you know that kind of wet the beak a little bit and thinks he's closer to getting that breakthrough victory. But here comes Chris Buescher. Never led a lap at COTA, coming off a 35th place finish at Atlanta after being swept up in a lap 190 crash. But in the last 5 road courses last season, 2nd at Sonoma, 6th at Road America, 10th at Indy. We could throw that out. 9th at Watkins Glen. Well, actually, no, maybe we shouldn't throw 10th at Indianapolis.
Actually, that's a great race.
Dude almost caught on fire and still found a way to get a top 10 finish. And then when you look at how he performed at the Roval, finished 6th there. So Christopher Buescher and Brad Keselowski, the tandem of RFK.
Yeah, I know that right now everyone's talking about how Brad Keselowski has led a lap in every race. I think that is the most irrelevant statistic ever read when it comes to NASCAR betting. I mean, you could just stay out and lead laps, and that's what he did. That's how he led laps. I don't think he's been, other than last week, super competitive in these races. I don't think that he's been, a top 3 car. However, it is important to get out there and lead laps, and I think that, I feel like last week had to have added to his confidence. However, when it comes to road courses, I think that Chris Buescher in the 17 has kind of stepped out, on Brad Keselowski at RFK. I think that, Chris Buescher, if I could just throw a blanket on the guy, I feel like if I could, I love him top 10, but I don't love him top 5. I wish I could just bet him to win or to finish between 5th and 10th because I don't guarantee. I think that's where he's going to finish.
That was about to be a bold proclamation here.
Yeah. I just think I think that he's going to finish between 5th and 10th. He'll never have a chance to win the race, but he'll just kind of ride around. If he qualifies 15th, which is kind of typical qualifying for him, I think he'll race up into the top 10. Have it be a threat to the top 5, but ultimately finish 7th or 8th. I think he's just very, very consistent on road courses. I think you could kind of throw McDowell into that same group, although McDowell might qualify a little bit better. I know that Buescher had this great finish at Sonoma. Some people think that he was kind of running down the 99 in Suarez, but a few things had to happen. You had Chase get out of the race, and then you also had Larson. So I think he's going to finish between 5th and 10th. I do think he'll run better than Brad Keselowski, but who knows? If RFK unloads well, Brad Keselowski is a great driver. This is nothing new, but at this point, I'd have to see him unload with a rocket before I'd take Brad Keselowski over Chris Buescher.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, especially the way he's currently being priced with a shorter number than this tandem of drivers who are no strangers to having some success on road courses, that being the drivers at JGR. No offense to Ty Gibbs, but you're not making the discussion for today's show. I'm talking about Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin. Both drivers struggled, and I don't know if struggle is a strong enough term to use their performance a season ago. When you look at Martin Truex Jr., 7th, 26th, 13th, 21st, 23rd, and 17th in the 6 races on road courses. Denny, worse. 18th, 31st, 17th, 14th, 20th, and 13th. But these guys are being priced well on down the odds board. We're not talking about them if they're 8-1, 10-1, or 12-1, but there's a prominent shop that hung them as high as 39-1. Can I interest you in 2 drivers that are buy low stocks potentially?
Absolutely. I think the upside is tremendous on these 2 drivers. And when I was referring to earlier, when I said, when I was talking about Chris Bell, and I guess we could lump Tyler Reddick in there. If Toyota unloads fast, I don't think that those are the guys to beat. I think that you could find yourself with Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr. fighting it out for a win here. Some people forget how good Truex has been at road courses, and I know a lot of it is, that sequential shifting versus, the H pattern, and that's where Truex was able to really kind of separate himself from the rest of the field. Man, I know we nibbled at that 39-1 on both of those guys, and by nibble, I mean tiny. But I think that there's tremendous upside with either one of those, and then I don't think it's much of an issue if they unload terribly, because then you can make some money potentially fading those names. And I don't know. I think that if Toyota unloads really well, you have Denny Hamlin, who's a tremendously aggressive, great restarter, and it has proven that he can win on road courses. And I think Truex, you'd have to make Truex the top Toyota guy. I would make him the favorite if Toyota unloads really well. I would make him the favorite of the Toyotas, not the favorite of the race. But I do think that if something happens in that 19 car and they're able to figure something out this weekend, you could potentially see a bomb hit with someone like Martin Truex Jr. And you know what? The only people that would be surprised would be casual fans, because the garage area would not be shocked if Martin Truex Jr. went out there and won a road course race, even though they struggled so much last year.
And we really haven't had those bombs come home early in the year this season like we did last year. Of course, Ricky Stenhouse, a major surprise in the Daytona 500, but since then you've seen pre-race favorites or guys pretty close to it end up grabbing the checkered flag. Nobody, to my knowledge, has won a race so far this season at a price of 10-1 or greater on race day, other than the season opener. So something to keep in mind. When we look at road courses, it gives us a unique opportunity to see some of the biggest names in the sport get their opportunity. May not be that familiar to NASCAR fans, but they are to race fans in general. Two of them very accomplished former F1 champions in Kimi Räikkönen and Jenson Button. And we'll get to see the much anticipated Cup debut of Jordan Taylor driving the 9 car for Hendrick Motorsports. We've seen a little bit of money come in on Jordan Taylor. His prices open upwards of 40-1 at some shops. That number as low as 22 at some books. Not a whole lot of movement on Kimi Räikkönen or Jenson Button. Kimi, reading some of his comments, feels, or at least suggests, that he's going to be more confident here, knowing that he did win a race in F1 at COTA in the past, a little bit different than racing sight unseen at Watkins Glen. And Jenson Button, good luck, my friend. These things don't quite handle like the cars you're used to driving.
Yeah, this is my advice to these guys, is stay out of trouble early. You know, it's really easy to get, kind of frustrated back in traffic. And, the amount of passing that happens in NASCAR is, drastically higher than what happens in Formula One. And it's okay to lose a few positions. It's important to stay on the lead lap and just minimize mistakes. These guys can race. If they get to the front of the field, I imagine that they'll run competitively fast laps. But you got to get there first, and it's a real quick learning curve. You're going to have, a short practice and then qualifying, and it's going to come at you really fast. And if you can just kind of set yourself up to, hey, let's just minimize mistakes. Let's pick up a few positions, and then let's see what we have in the third stage. I guess you say that like later in the race. So the third stage of the race. I think that I'll say this. I'm the highest on Jordan Taylor. I almost said JT, like it's like Justin Thomas, like everyone's just going to know who that is. But I think the most upside is Jordan Taylor, and I think that's because he's raced less open wheel stuff than some of these other guys. But I think Jenson Button's really going to struggle. If I had to pick someone to really struggle, Kimi actually has done this before and has showed speed at times, but ultimately doesn't really have any finishes that have amounted to much. The one thing I'll say, if Jordan Taylor can qualify well, I do think that he could race kind of in the top 10. And like Regan Smith said, I wouldn't be shocked if he won, and I wouldn't be shocked if he finished 30th. So I think that, Regan kind of summed it up quite nicely when kind of breaking down these drivers. I think that Jordan, like I said, most upside, and Jenson will struggle the most.
Definitely a wide range of outcomes, very much possible for this trio of names. I'm curious to see who books decide to set these guys up with in head-to-head matchups, because on paper you can understand some of the energy and optimism they may create amongst the casual fan, but against drivers that may not have race-winning cars but can finish 15 to 20th, oftentimes that can be the most profitable way to approach the matchup card. But we'll await to see what numbers hit the screen. I know there are a handful of books that do have matchups up early, but didn't see a ton involving these three names, and you can understand why. The same can be said about Jimmy Johnson, who will drive the 84. Could be a jolt to his system, but you never want to discount a 7-time champion in this series. You can follow Chris on Twitter. That's at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, though, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. And Wormser, the audience is putting your feet to the fire. They want you to land another absolute bomb like you did last week with Corey LaJoie and his improbable run at Atlanta. Where are you taking us for an early week investment as we head to the road course in Austin?
Well, we're going to stick with the road course ringer and AJ Allmendinger at those Canby books, which would be Barstool and Bet Rivers. I like AJ Allmendinger to finish in the top 10 at minus 134. And here's why. I like this top 10 price a lot more than a top 5 price. Now, I do think that AJ Allmendinger has a chance at winning this race, but I'm avoiding this top 5 for one reason only. AJ is super aggressive on restarts. If we find ourselves in a late race restart, I think there's a chance that AJ could do something silly trying to get to the win. Now, could he get out there and win the race? Absolutely. But I want to give myself a little bit of leeway with a 10th place spot versus a top 5. He's just so aggressive. The other reason why I like this top 10 is if he finds himself with a mistake, which is something that AJ Allmendinger likes to do, is make these little mistakes, he can drive his way back up into the top 10 if he goes to the rear of the field. Let's say there's 30 cars on the lead lap. I wouldn't put it past him to get inside of the top 10 if he does that even with 15 or 16 laps to go. That's how fast this guy can be on road courses. So I like the top 10 price more than I like the top 5 price. If you're going to sprinkle a little bit of a win there, I wouldn't be too upset about that either. But ultimately, I think the play is AJ Allmendinger top 10 minus 134 at Canby Books, which would be Barstool and Bet Rivers.
I figured you'd find a way to get Dinger into the racing portfolio this weekend. Wasn't quite sure how you were going to shoehorn him in there, whether it was going to be head-to-head matchups or something else a little bit different. But I had a feeling he would make the mix, and more than happy to back him in the top 10 at a price just north of minus $1.30. Any final words of wisdom, parting shots, things you would like to share with our audience? I know you have a pre-race poll plan for Sunday that folks can check out on your social media channels if they're looking for a little bit more perspective, especially when you're working off of practice times and you've seen how a lot of these cars have unloaded, along with the Xfinity race already in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, I mean, the pre-race poll is something I do for a lot for myself, is just kind of talking through what I think will happen in the race. I usually do it about 2 hours before the race goes green. It's a live live stream, and I just kind of ramble for about a half an hour, and a lot of interaction with fans. So if you have questions, be sure to bring those to the pre-race poll, as we can kind of talk through things. There's a lot of times I learn stuff from people on the live stream. So be sure to tune into that. I usually post when that is on my social media. So come on in and let's chat, have a drink, and talk about racing. But I'm excited for this race. This is you have some races that you're excited for. Obviously, always Fontana. I'm always excited for it. It's a great betting track. But there's so many unknowns this week at COTA. I'm really curious to see how things play out with no cautions. And I think, the people that probably listen to this podcast are seeing around the corner, hopefully more than odds makers. And let's try to, cash some tickets in the meantime.
Always the name of the game, to be proactive in sports betting rather than reactive. We know odds makers are basing these numbers on current form and the way drivers have shown through the first handful of races this season. If you can anticipate change or drivers that may be an adjustment or two away from figuring it out, that's how you find yourself in the winner's circle. Remember, we'll also have a race day matchup, maybe more depending on what's out there and available. You can get that information on the Bet the Board website. I retweet the podcast on Sunday, or you guys can consistently click refresh, hoping that you get to the best of the number there, because we know those things will be on the move. So best of luck to all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners. Appreciate you guys tuning in for a full breakdown this week from COTA. Special thanks to Regan Smith, who gave us a lot more time than we originally planned for early on. An invaluable perspective from a former driver at the highest levels, and we know he has access to a lot of great information as a pit road reporter for Fox. So best of luck again, and hopefully with an AJ Allmendinger top 10 ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.
Peace.